February 9th, 2012. The Beverly Hilton Hotel, Los Angeles. The Grammy Award were just 2 days away, and Hollywood's elite had gathered for Clive Davis's legendary pre-Grammy party. Whitney Houston was scheduled to perform, a comeback moment that the entire music industry was watching with equal parts hope and fear. Backstage in the dim corridor leading to the ballroom, Ray Watson, Whitney's head of security for the past 3 years, stood beside the woman he had sworn to protect. But what she whispered to him in those final moments before walking into that room would haunt him for the rest of his life. Those words weren't just a confession. They were a prophecy, a final message, and a heartbreaking truth that Ray would carry alone until the moment he finally revealed it to the one person who needed to hear it most. If you want to understand the real Whitney Houston behind the headlines, behind the addiction struggles, behind the public failures, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story will show you the woman the world never got to see. The mother who knew her time was running out. The artist who understood exactly what was about to happen. Let's go back to where it all began to unravel. Ray Watson had been working executive protection for high-profile clients for 15 years before he met Whitney Houston in 2009. He had protected politicians, tech billionaires, and Hollywood A-listers, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the complexity of protecting someone who was simultaneously running from the world and desperately trying to reconnect with it. When Ray first took the job, Whitney's team warned him that this wouldn't be a typical security assignment. This wasn't about keeping overeager fans at bay or managing paparazzi. This was about protecting Whitney from herself, from the demons she had been fighting since childhood, from the expectations that had crushed her spirit, and from the substances that had promised escape but delivered only deeper imprisonment. Their first real conversation happened not in a professional setting, but at 3 a.m. in a hotel room in Atlanta. Whitney couldn't sleep, a chronic problem that Ray would come to recognize as one of her many struggles. She had called down to the lobby asking if Ray could come up, not because there was a security threat, but because she needed someone to talk to who wouldn't judge her, wouldn't sell her story to the tabloids, and wouldn't pretend that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Ray found her sitting on the balcony, wrapped in a hotel robe, looking out at the city lights with an expression that he would later describe as profound sadness mixed with resignation. She didn't look like the Whitney Houston from the iconic music videos or the triumphant award show performances. She looked like a woman who had been carrying an impossible weight for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. They talked for 3 hours that night, and Ray learned things about Whitney that the public never knew, would never know, and perhaps couldn't understand even if they tried. Whitney told him about growing up in Newark, about singing in the New Hope Baptist Church where her mother Sissy was the choir director, about the impossibly high standards that surrounded her from childhood. Everyone expected perfection from me before I even knew what perfection meant, she explained to Ray that night. Her voice was soft but clear, the same voice that had delivered some of the most powerful vocal performances in music history, now stripped of all performance, all artifice, just pure honesty in the darkness. When I was 7 years old, my mother would have me sing for guests at dinner parties. If I made one mistake, just one tiny mistake, I would see the disappointment in her face. I learned very young that love and approval came with conditions, and the condition was being flawless. Ray listened without interrupting, a skill he had learned early in his protection career. Sometimes the best way to protect someone was simply to let them speak their truth without fear of judgment or consequence. Whitney spoke about meeting Bobby Brown, about the instant connection they had felt, about how he was the first person who made her feel like she could just be herself without having to be the voice, the icon, the perfect daughter. But she also spoke with painful honesty about how their relationship had become toxic, how they had enabled each other's worst impulses, and how their daughter Bobbi Kristina had witnessed things no child should ever see. The guilt about Chrissy, that's what keeps me up at night, Whitney confessed, using the family nickname for her daughter. Ray, I've made so many mistakes, but the worst one was letting my baby girl see me at my lowest. She watched me destroy myself, and now I see her starting down the same path, and I don't know how to save her when I can't even save myself. This conversation established a pattern that would continue throughout Ray's time protecting Whitney. He became more than her bodyguard. He became her confessor, her late-night counselor, and eventually, the keeper of her deepest truths. Over the next 3 years, Ray witnessed Whitney's desperate attempts to reclaim her life and her career. He was there during her 2009 comeback tour, when she struggled to hit notes that had once come effortlessly, when she would break down crying backstage after performances that the audience thought were triumphant, but that she knew were shadows of what she had once been capable of. He was there during the recording sessions for her final album, when she would spend hours trying to capture the magic that had once been as natural as breathing, when she would listen to playbacks of her younger voice and weep at the comparison. But he was also there during moments of hope and genuine joy. Ray saw Whitney with Bobbi Kristina during the good times, during the periods of sobriety when mother and daughter would laugh together, watch movies together, and dream about the future together. Those moments were precious and fragile, and Whitney seemed to know even then that they were temporary, that the darkness was always waiting to reclaim her. Ray learned to read Whitney's patterns, to recognize the signs when she was spiraling, to understand the difference between her public persona and her private pain. He saw how she would put on the Whitney Houston mask when cameras were present, how she would straighten her posture, adjust her smile, and become the icon that the world expected to see. But he also saw how exhausting that performance was, how it drained every ounce of energy she had left. By early 2012, Ray had noticed disturbing changes in Whitney's behavior and physical condition. She was sleeping less, sometimes going days without more than a few hours of rest. Her weight had dropped dramatically, and her hands shook when she thought no one was looking. Most concerning to Ray was the look in her eyes, a kind of distant acceptance that he had seen before in combat veterans who had made peace with their own mortality. During the weeks leading up to the Beverly Hilton engagement, Whitney became increasingly reflective and philosophical. She talked often about legacy, about what she would leave behind, about whether her music would outlive the scandals and the struggles. She spoke about Bobbi Kristina constantly, obsessively, with a mixture of fierce maternal love and devastating guilt. Ray tried to convince her to seek more intensive help, to check into a treatment facility, to take a break from the relentless pressure of public appearances. But Whitney was committed to this performance at Clive Davis's party. Clive had believed in her when no one else did, she told Ray. He had discovered her, shaped her career, stood by her through everything. She owed him this appearance, this performance, this public declaration that she was still here, still fighting, still the Whitney Houston that the world remembered. The days before the Beverly Hilton performance were chaotic and concerning. Ray watched as Whitney struggled with basic preparations, as she fought with her vocal coach about which songs she could realistically perform, as she tried on outfit after outfit, rejecting each one because nothing looked right anymore, nothing felt right anymore. On February 9th, the day of the performance, Ray arrived at Whitney's suite early in the morning. He found her already awake, sitting at the window and looking out at Los Angeles spread beneath her. She looked small and vulnerable in a way that broke his heart. This woman who had once commanded stages in front of hundreds of thousands of people, who had sold millions of records, who had been called the Voice, now reduced to a fragile figure struggling to face one more day, one more performance, one more moment of being Whitney Houston. They didn't speak for several minutes. Ray had learned that sometimes Whitney needed silence more than conversation, needed someone to simply be present without demanding anything from her. Finally, she turned to him with an expression he had never seen before, a kind of peaceful clarity that was somehow more frightening than her usual anxiety and turmoil. "Ray," she said quietly, "I need you to do something for me. Not today, but later. When the time comes, you'll know." He moved closer, his protective instincts immediately alert. "Whitney, what are you talking about? What time?" She smiled, a sad, knowing smile that seemed to carry the weight of prophecy. "There are things I need to say to Chrissy, things she needs to hear from me. But I don't think I'm going to get the chance to say them myself. So I need you to remember. I need you to be my voice when I can't speak anymore." Ray felt a chill run through him. "You're going to have plenty of chances to talk to Bobbi Kristina. You're going to get through this rough patch and things are going to get better. Whitney shook her head gently. Ray, I appreciate the optimism, but we both know that's not true. I can feel it. Something's ending. I don't know if it's today or tomorrow or next week, but it's close now. I'm tired, Ray. I'm so tired of fighting. I'm tired of disappointing everyone. I'm tired of being a shadow of who I used to be. Throughout the day, as preparations for the evening's performance continued, Whitney's mood oscillated between determination and despair. Her team bustled around her, adjusting her makeup, styling her hair, coordinating with Clive Davis's people about the performance logistics. But Ray noticed that Whitney seemed increasingly disconnected from all the activity, as if she was watching everything from a great distance, already half removed from the world she had inhabited for so long. In the late afternoon, Whitney asked everyone to leave her suite except Ray. She needed to rest before the performance, she told her team, and she wanted Ray to stand watch to ensure no one disturbed her. Once they were alone, Whitney sat down on the couch and gestured for Ray to sit across from her. What she said next would change everything. Ray, I want to tell you what to tell Chrissy. Please, just listen and remember. Promise me you'll remember every word. Ray leaned forward, his full attention focused on this woman he had come to care for deeply. This woman who seemed to be preparing for something that terrified him to contemplate. Whitney spoke for nearly an hour, and Ray listened without interruption, committing every word to memory with the intensity of a man who understood that he was receiving a sacred trust. She talked about her love for Bobbi Kristina, about how becoming a mother had been the greatest joy of her life, about how she had tried desperately to be both the mother she wanted to be and the star the world demanded she remain. She spoke about her regrets, the moments she had chosen her career over her daughter, the time she had been too intoxicated or too depressed to be present, the example she had set that she knew was dangerous and destructive. Tell Chrissy that every mistake I made because I was weak, not because I didn't love her enough, Whitney said, tears streaming down her face. Tell her that she was always more important to me than any record, any award, any performance. Tell her that when I looked at her, I saw everything good and pure that I had ever created, that she was my masterpiece, not any song I ever sang. Whitney paused, struggling to maintain her composure. Tell her that addiction is a liar. It promises escape, but it delivers prison. It promises relief, but it delivers more pain. Tell her that I didn't want this life of struggle and addiction. I wanted to be the mother she deserved, the mother I saw in my dreams, the mother who was strong and stable and present. But more than anything, Ray, tell her that she has a choice. She doesn't have to follow my path. She doesn't have to make my mistakes. She can break the cycle. She can choose life. She can choose healing. She can choose to be more than her mother's daughter. She can choose to be herself, whoever that is, whatever that means. Whitney looked directly into Ray's eyes with an intensity that took his breath away. Tell her that I'm proud of her, that I've always been proud of her, that even when I was at my worst, even when I was too lost in my own darkness to show it, I was proud of her. Tell her that she brought light into my life when everything else was darkness. Tell her that being her mother was the greatest privilege of my life, and my only real regret is that I wasn't better at it. Ray felt tears running down his own face, something that rarely happened to him despite years in a profession that required emotional control. Whitney, you can tell her these things yourself. You're going to get through tonight, you're going to keep working on your recovery, and you're going to have years to build a better relationship with Bobbi Kristina. Whitney smiled again, that same sad, knowing smile. Maybe you're right, Ray. I hope you're right. But promise me anyway. Promise me that if something happens, you'll make sure she knows. Promise me you'll be there for her, that you'll try to guide her away from the path I took. Ray's voice was thick with emotion. I promise, Whitney. I promise I'll tell her everything. As evening approached, and it was time to head downstairs to the Beverly Hilton ballroom, Whitney went through her final preparations with a calmness that concerned Ray even more than her earlier agitation would have. She looked beautiful in her chosen outfit, her makeup expertly applied to hide the toll that years of substance abuse had taken on her once flawless complexion. But Ray could see past the surface, could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she had to steady herself against furniture as she moved through the suite. They left her room together, Ray walking slightly ahead of her as he always did, his eyes scanning for potential threats, his body positioned to intercept any danger. But the real danger wasn't in the hallway or the elevator or the lobby. The real danger was inside Whitney herself, in the chemical imbalances, the damaged organs, the years of abuse that had weakened her body beyond repair. As they walked down the corridor toward the backstage area of the ballroom, Whitney suddenly stopped. Ray immediately turned, alert for whatever had caused her pause. But there was no external threat. Whitney was simply standing still, looking at him with an expression of such profound emotion that it nearly broke him. This is when she leaned in close and whispered the words that Ray would carry with him for the rest of his life. Her voice was barely audible, meant only for him, a final secret shared between two people who had developed a bond that transcended professional boundaries. Ray, when you tell Chrissy everything I said, tell her one more thing. Tell her that her mama finally made peace with herself. Tell her that I stopped fighting and found some kind of grace at the end. Tell her that I wasn't afraid. Tell her that my last thoughts were of her and how much I loved her. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger, but I'm grateful I got to be her mother, even imperfectly. Before Ray could respond, Whitney straightened up, adjusted her outfit, and transformed herself into the Whitney Houston that the world expected to see. The vulnerable woman disappeared, replaced by the performer, the icon, the legend. She walked into the ballroom where Clive Davis and hundreds of music industry executives and celebrities awaited her appearance. And for a few brief moments, she was magnificent again, a reminder of the incredible talent that had captivated the world for decades. But Ray knew, standing in the shadows and watching her, that he had just witnessed something final, something that felt like a farewell. The performance was brief, not the full set that had been originally planned, but enough to remind everyone why Whitney Houston had been called the Voice. When it was over, when she had finished and the crowd had applauded and she had smiled and waved, she walked past Ray on her way back to her suite and squeezed his hand without speaking. That was the last time Ray Watson saw Whitney Houston alive. 3 days later, on February 11th, 2012, Whitney was found dead in the bathtub of her Beverly Hilton Hotel suite. The official cause of death was accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use listed as contributing factors. The world mourned, the media analyzed, the public debated, and the music industry lost one of its greatest voices. But Ray Watson carried a burden that no one else shared. He had Whitney's final message, her last words of love and regret and hope, and he had promised to deliver them to the one person who needed to hear them most. For months after Whitney's death, Ray struggled with when and how to fulfill his promise. Bobbi Kristina was devastated by her mother's death, spiraling deeper into the same destructive patterns that had claimed Whitney. She was angry, lost, self-medicating, and surrounded by people who either couldn't or wouldn't help her find a healthier path. Ray tried to reach out through Whitney's family, through Bobby Brown, through anyone who might facilitate a conversation with Bobbi Kristina. But grief and chaos and old resentments made access difficult, and Ray began to fear that he would never get the chance to deliver Whitney's message. It wasn't until nearly a year after Whitney's death that Ray finally got his opportunity. He received a call from Pat Houston, Whitney's sister-in-law and former manager, asking if he could meet with Bobbi Kristina. The young woman was in crisis, Pat explained, and she had specifically asked to speak with Ray, perhaps sensing that he held something important, some final connection to her mother. They met at a private location, away from cameras and media and anyone who might exploit the moment. Bobbi Kristina looked so much like her mother that Ray felt his heart constrict. She had the same eyes, the same facial structure, but also the same haunted expression that Whitney had worn during her worst periods. Ray sat across from her and began to speak, delivering the message he had been carrying for a year. He told her everything Whitney had said that afternoon in the hotel suite, every word of love and regret and hope. He told her about Whitney's pride in her daughter, about her desperate wish that Bobbi Kristina would choose a different path, about her final thoughts being of her daughter and her love. Bobbi Kristina cried as she listened, deep sobs that seemed to come from the very core of her being. Ray, did she know? Did she know she was going to die? Ray considered the question carefully. I think your mother knew she was in danger. I think she knew her body and spirit were failing. I don't think she planned to die that day, but I think she felt something ending, and she wanted to make sure you knew how much she loved you. What happened next was something Ray had hoped for, but hadn't dared to expect. Bobbi Kristina began to open up about her own struggles, her own pain, her own fears that she was doomed to repeat her mother's mistakes. For the first time since Whitney's death, she spoke honestly about her substance abuse, her depression, her feeling that she had lost her anchor and was drifting toward the same tragic end. Ray spent hours with her that day, not as a security professional, but as the keeper of her mother's final message, as a witness to Whitney's love, as someone who understood both the depths of addiction and the possibility of redemption. He shared resources, contacts for treatment programs, numbers for counselors who specialized in grief and addiction. For a brief period, it seemed like Whitney's message had made a difference. Bobbi Kristina entered treatment, began working on her recovery, and talked about wanting to honor her mother's memory by choosing life over destruction. But the pull of addiction and the weight of generational trauma proved too powerful. On January 31st, 2015, nearly 3 years after her mother's death, Bobbi Kristina was found unconscious in a bathtub in circumstances that were horrifically similar to Whitney's death. She never regained consciousness and died on July 26, 2015, at just 22 years old. Ray Watson was devastated by Bobbi Kristina's death in ways that went beyond professional concern or personal sadness. He felt that he had failed in his final duty to Whitney, that her message hadn't been enough to save her daughter, that the cycle of destruction had continued despite his best efforts. He struggled with guilt and grief, questioning whether he should have done more, said more, intervened more forcefully. It took years of therapy and reflection for Ray to come to terms with what had happened, to understand that he had fulfilled his promise to Whitney, but that some battles are fought against forces too powerful for any single message or intervention to overcome. Today, Ray Watson no longer works in executive protection. Instead, he dedicates his time to speaking about addiction, mental health, and the hidden struggles of people in the entertainment industry. He shares Whitney's final message not just with Bobbi Kristina's memory, but with anyone who will listen, hoping that her words of warning and love might reach someone before it's too late. In interviews and speaking engagements, Ray talks about the woman behind the icon, the mother behind the superstar, the struggling human being behind the voice. He emphasizes that Whitney Houston was more than her addictions, more than her public failures, more than the tragic circumstances of her death. She was a woman who loved deeply, who struggled courageously, and who in her final days wanted nothing more than to save her daughter from the same fate that claimed her. Whitney's message that Ray carried for years and continues to share is ultimately about hope even in the face of seemingly insurmountable darkness. It's about the power of love to transcend death, about the importance of breaking generational cycles of trauma and addiction, about the possibility that we can all choose a different path regardless of what we've witnessed or experienced. This heartbreaking story reminds us that behind every headline and every scandal, there are real human beings struggling with pain that the world doesn't see or understand. Whitney Houston knew she was running out of time, and she used her final moments of clarity to send a message of love and warning to the daughter she cherished above all else. Though that message ultimately couldn't save Bobbi Kristina, it continues to resonate with anyone who has struggled with addiction, who has watched a loved one destroy themselves, or who has felt trapped by patterns they desperately want to break. What would you say to someone you love if you knew your time was ending? How can we better support people struggling with addiction before it's too late? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear Whitney's message today. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because we have more powerful stories that reveal the humanity behind the headlines and remind us that love and hope can exist even in the darkest moments. Until next time, remember that it's never too late to choose a different path. And sometimes the most powerful legacy we can leave is a message of love that outlives us.